Good morning. My name is Matt Morazis with VCOM Solutions, and I will be your moderator for today. You'll notice that once you've logged in, your default audio setting is set to mute. We've done this to avoid interruptions while attendees log in. There will be an opportunity for questions and answers during the webinar, but we ask that you use the QA section in the upper right-hand portion of your screen to post your questions. We'll also be including poll questions during this presentation. We'll let you know the appropriate time to answer them. This session will be recorded and made available to you at a future date. Today's topic is Telecom Invoice Management, and today's speaker is Jennifer Frey. Jennifer is the Vice President of Customer Experience for VCOM Solutions. Her core focus is fostering a growing strategic relationships with VCOM's clients. Jennifer works closely with the client relationship management and senior engagement management teams to ensure customer retention and satisfaction. She refined her client relationship skills at Networld Communications, a leading systems integrator of enhanced voice and network services. Her experience allowed her to contribute significantly to the development of the VCOM client relationship management team and the support of VCOM's clients. Jennifer was a recipient of the VCOM Commitment to Service Award in January 2005. With that, I'm going to hand you over to your speaker, Jennifer Frey.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today's topic is Telecom Invoice Management. So as far as today's agenda, this is the second in a series of webinars discussing the challenges of telecom management. During today's webinar, we will be covering invoice management and processing. We'll be talking through invoice management challenges and identifying why this topic is important. Questions we'll be covering include, what are these challenges? What options do you have? What solution providers are there? And we'll also outline next steps. Telecom is historically one of the top 5 operating expenses within an organization. We at VCOM Solutions see successful telecom management comprised of multiple elements within a life cycle. Some of you will be familiar with this visual diagram. We believe all elements must be addressed in order to ensure the most cost-effective use of telecom inventory, and inventory being anything that generates a monthly expense, such as a circuit or service. Today, we're going to look at invoice management in the context of this larger life cycle. What is invoice management and why is it important? Invoice management is how your organization reviews, approves, and pays for telecom services through carrier invoicing, or some of you may be familiar with web portals. Telecom is the 4th or 5th largest expense as noted by Aberdeen in 2012. Aberdeen also identified that 92% of carrier invoices have an error. So bear in mind that it may be a monthly charge you're reviewing, so any carrier invoice errors may be compounded. And your goal is to avoid overpaying for erroneous invoicing. The questions organizations need to ask themselves is how do you address that and do so in an accurate manner, while also remaining cognizant of the speed in which you're processing those payments in order to avoid carrier late fee charges. To establish a baseline of understanding telecom invoice management, we've provided this diagram, and you can think of each dot as signifying the number of invoices or carriers that you're managing. So what are the typical steps involved? Initially, you likely receive an invoice either as a paper document or from a carrier web portal. From there, you may go through a review process to identify if the invoice reflects your contracted rates or if there are errors that need to be addressed with the carrier. So at this point, if there are errors, you pursue a dispute resolution with the carrier to adjust the expense. So as some of you may be familiar, it should be noted this part of the process can be quite time intensive, as it requires you to identify the appropriate contact at the carrier and submit the dispute. So not only can this present a challenge to submit that dispute, but then also to manage that process and track it through to resolution is often very involved. Once you've determined how you're going to address the dispute with the carrier, The invoice goes through your approval process and then is submitted for payment. So at each of these points, there are challenges that can negatively affect this process. And as you may be aware, those challenges cost businesses both time and money each month. So we're going to discuss 3 of the most common challenges. Challenges of invoice management we see as invoice review, dispute resolution, and late charges.
And now we're going to take a point for a new poll question, the first of the 3. And so you'll see pop up on your screen a poll question with 30 seconds to respond. And the question is, what percentage of your invoices do you receive electronically? So please take the time to respond to this as soon as you can. You've got about another 15 seconds. Okay, so that's the end of our poll.
Thank you, Matt. So we can see here that the majority of you responded indicating that fewer than 25% of your invoices that you receive monthly are electronic in format. That matches a lot of what we see when we're talking with clients as far as managing primarily paper invoices, trying to move to an electronic format, but carriers are not always supporting that. So working toward that, but obviously you're working with the carrier's ability to support moving to an electronic invoice.
Thanks, Jennifer. We'll continue.
So now we're going to talk through the first challenge, which we see as invoice review. As many of you can likely relate, invoices are often confusing and unclear. There are generally many pages involved in the review, and it's hard to understand the actual charges. So for example, you'll see carriers where the bill is broken out into 2 different bills for one circuit, and you have no ability to link the 2 charges together or understand what type of service it is, whether it's voice or data. You also have carrier branding of services. It's difficult to identify like service offerings from different carriers. An example here would be an AT&T PRI is going to be billed and look completely different than a Verizon local PRI. Also, carrier invoices and portals have different formats, which adds to the difficulty of reviewing and processing for payment. We talked earlier about the Aberdeen study indicating 92% of carrier invoices have an error, which begs the question, how much could your organization be overspending due to not catching those carrier errors? Additionally, how do you know what you're missing? It remains important to consider. You've also got the challenge of third-party fees, closed offices with live services, and those type of problems we see regularly when reviewing carrier bills. The second challenge is dispute resolution. How do you reconcile carrier billing errors? What's your baseline? How do you measure that? When you do identify a billing error with the carrier, how do you pursue resolution? Is there an outlined process to follow? Do you have the ability to escalate? You're also going to need to consider how much time it takes to get that issue resolved. What is your means of receiving updates on the status of those issues? In order to begin addressing that, you're going to need to consider who within your organization is pursuing disputes, and is that their primary role? We find that it's more likely it's a portion of that person's existing responsibilities. Therefore, it's important to determine if they have the time and necessary tools to be effective in that area. And you're, of course, going to need to be mindful of the time being spent and evaluate whether or not you're obtaining a favorable resolution.
And now we're going to take the second of the poll questions, the second of the 3. And so you'll see posted on your screen the next poll question, and you'll have 30 seconds to respond. And the question is, how many people touch each invoice on a monthly basis, and it lists a number of different individuals that would potentially handle an invoice before approval. You've got about another 10 seconds to log your answer. So poll is finished.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So we see the majority of you answered 3 to 5. That is more favorable than I anticipated, as we generally hear when you consider mail room, front desk, admin people potentially, various people on the IT department, and then accounting and staff on that side of the house, that it tends to be higher, but 3 to 5 is certainly headed in the right direction. The idea here, you want to try to really streamline that process.
Great, so we'll go ahead and continue.
So the third challenge we're going to talk through is carrier late fees. So carrier bills across carriers and services will have different payment due dates. So what does this mean to you? Well, those different due dates mean greater potential for invoices to be lost in that approval process. So you're going to want to consider, do you have multiple approvers as part of your invoice workflow? If so, how are the invoices tracked through approval and payment process to avoid those late charges? And how often are invoices delayed or mishandled in that approval process? As far as tracking and monitoring late fees, we find customers often aren't tracking those, so they don't know the true cost of the late fees and how quickly those accumulate. So now we're going to talk through some solutions, those being invoice consolidation, leveraging a dedicated expert, and tools. Solution 1 being invoice consolidation. The idea here is to address the review of invoices from different carriers with varying formats. So the question we're looking to answer is, how can I improve the invoice review process? A potential option is to consolidate billing under one carrier. So as we know, telecom invoices are difficult to read, but working with a single carrier would minimize the number of invoice formats, making it easier for you to review them. From a best case scenario perspective, all services would be consolidated into that one carrier, ideally with a summary bill if it's offered. However, that's not always possible. And you may not be able to consolidate under one carrier due to their service coverage areas and the services they have available in their product portfolio. So that may not be an option for you to explore. The goal ultimately is fewer carriers and fewer invoices, thereby simplifying the process. The second solution we want to talk through is the dedicated experts. The idea is you would have someone to address the dispute resolution process and improve how you're managing disputes. So you would dedicate someone from your staff to handle the management of that. What can you expect as far as the role and what that would entail? Well, this person would need to work with the carrier account reps to pursue disputes on behalf of your organization. They would obtain carrier contracts and then reconcile the invoice line items against those contracts. They're going to need to learn carrier protocols to pursue disputes, allowing them to become more effective in their pursuit. It's beneficial if the person already has telecom experience or contacts to facilitate dispute resolution. And if this person proves to be capable, they should naturally become more proficient in this area. Couple of things to consider. Their success rate is going to be dependent on their existing workload and how much time he or she can devote to being successful. And it's also important to remember disputes can take a long time to reconcile, and it's going to be beneficial if that person in the position has a low turnover, because that's going to allow them to be effective and have a high success ratio. So the third solution we want to talk through is tools. The question we're looking to answer is how to manage this process with tools. One way of navigating that would be an invoice sign-in spreadsheet. So that spreadsheet could track invoices during the approval process to minimize what we referred to earlier as those lost invoices. Now, in environments where you have a multi-approver process, using a spreadsheet would allow you to know where the invoice is in processing. In theory, you could generate an Excel spreadsheet with checkboxes for approvers and due dates, which would be accessible through a network shared drive. Your goal here would be to document what stage they are in process to let accounting know where the invoice is and when it's due for payment. You're going to need someone to own and oversee the day-to-day review of the spreadsheet to expedite that approval process. Now, there are some potential problems or challenges that we see that we would want you to take into consideration. You're going to need to have little turnover in this position or it will affect performance. You're going to need a follow-through plan if that person who's overseeing that or project managing that, if you will, is sick or on vacation. And it's important to note that this may not be foolproof. You can still misplace documents, they don't end up on the spreadsheet, and it doesn't account for human error. So those are important variables. Some other options, you could pay the invoice within a 3% variance of last month's bill. The benefit there is that it's going to speed up the invoice review process. Some important considerations are you're going to be accepting a 3% margin of error to minimize those potential late fees. And with that, you don't know the baseline of charges to know whether that's correct and if there's a variance, why, and if it's usage or if it's legitimate. So the idea here being we hear often customers do come up with a somewhat arbitrary baseline and then apply that 3% variable. If you don't know whether or not that baseline initially included non-recurring charges or a spike in usage or illegitimate fees to begin with, you don't know that you're starting with a quote-unquote clean baseline. So that's important to consider. Another option would be to decentralize the invoice approval process. You could make each office, region, or entity responsible for approving. The review would be more accurate because you may have those frontline people more familiar with those services giving you feedback on the accuracy, but it could cost you in that there may be greater potential in late fees or delays. You're also going to have to dedicate a resource and a plan to ensure those offices, regions, or entities turn around their review and approval in a timely manner.
And now we're going to see the third of our 3 poll questions addressing invoice management. And so you'll see the last of the 3 posted on your screen, and you'll have 30 seconds to log in your answer. And the question is, can you identify overages? So what's your ability that you feel that you can identify overages at this point? We have about another 10 seconds. Okay, so the poll is closed out.
Great, thank you, Matt. So we see the majority of responses indicate no, that you are not able to easily identify overages. Well, you're certainly not alone. This is definitely the feedback that we receive from clients managing carriers directly and those associated invoices. Again, it's difficult to read the invoice, let alone determine whether or not that's accurate and if you're receiving contracted rates or what those outliers are. So now we're going to talk through optimum solutions of telecom management. So we're going to be outlining both traditional models, which are comprised of professional services and software, and then the hybrid model of professional services and software. So professional services, an example would be an auditing firm. A benefit here is your ability to leverage their expertise in addressing different facets of telecom. They likely have experience to lend and to assist with respect to best practices. You'll gain visibility into telecom through reports, which may be available weekly or monthly. Services are going to be fee-based, monthly charge, or as needed. And although the firm may handle invoice review and dispute resolution, your visibility is really going to be limited to reporting. Additionally, as far as late charges are concerned, these firms cannot address unless they handle the whole AP process, and so then you're going to need to consider how expensive that is for your organization. And they're also going to be addressing a window of time, not ongoing management. And we see this process often needs to be reevaluated or repeated after some time. So a professional services firm may come in, benchmark services, make some recommendations, leverage their best practices, and then move on. And then at some point, you're going to have to revisit and develop a new baseline and almost restart that again. So the other traditional model would be software. An example would be a TEM software provider. The software is designed to provide visibility into telecom expenses, and they're going to give you that visibility through reports, which are often available as needed or real time. The software is going to be purchased by seat license or monthly subscription. Now bear in mind, this won't simplify the invoice review. However, it can help in recognizing billing errors, but you and your team are still going to need to deal with the disputes themselves. A TEM software will help automate invoice tracking to avoid late charges if invoices are converted to an electronic format. And an important consideration is you'll still need a staff to supplement to make sure you have the time and resources to dedicate to be successful. On the right here, we have the hybrid model, which is professional services and software. And the example here would be professional services and software combined as a service offering, telecom management as a service. With this model, you're going to get visibility into telecom through software reports, and customized versions of those may be available. You're going to have professional services to oversee processing moves, add, change, disconnect requests with the carriers, and managing that trouble ticket process. The cost is going to be highly subsidized through existing telecom services. And then the invoice review process is going to be simplified because invoices can be consolidated and or charges, taxes broken out by business unit, entity, region. You're going to see some more flexibility there. Disputes are handled through a professional services team, so that's not only identifying the dispute, but then managing it with the carrier and essentially shielding you and your team from the responsibility associated with that. And those escalations are going to be visible through the software. You're also going to have automated invoice tracking through electronic file conversion and a built-in invoice and workflow automation and tracking. So as far as next steps are concerned, we will follow up after the webinar and send a copy of today's presentation for your review. We will also include a self-assessment, which will provide you with a look at the inventory and locations you're supporting. Regardless of the route you pursue, engaging key stakeholders in support of the efficiencies you're looking to make and identifying the appropriate team members to assist, we see as key elements in setting yourself up to be successful. So the idea here being you're going to need buy-off and engagement from those team members for long-term success. Thank you for attending today's webinar. I'll now engage Matt to determine if we have any questions.
Thanks, Jennifer. And so now we're in the questions and answers period. So we're going to look at what we received from you in terms of questions and answers. And let's see, Jennifer, we got a question from the audience. The question is about the, you mentioned the 3% variance idea on invoice approval. It says, if the 3% variance idea is used to speed up invoice review to avoid late charges, what's the downside of doing it this way?
Sure. So I talked about a little earlier, you want to be mindful of that baseline. Because you may have initiated that at a high point. There may be errors when you essentially took that snapshot, and those may very well then continue. You're also not accounting for what we refer to as non-recurring charges like install fees or wiring or fluctuations in usage. So you're really going to want to be mindful of the accuracy of that snapshot and then understanding when there is that variance, is that accurate? Should you have been billed for that difference in the 3%?
Great. Okay, great. So we have another question here. This one is, we have a telecom manager now. We struggle to understand what we have under contract. So what can we do to improve this?
Well, another real challenge that we see and hear from customers, I think it's important to start with an inventory. Traditionally, I think if you go to the carrier account team and just ask for all contracts, it's going to take quite some time to see any real traction there. So I would start, if you do have that telecom manager, by essentially determining what information do you have already noted, to go to that carrier to say, based on these circuits or these services, can you tell me whether or not they're under contract, and start to peel it back from there. Their systems are very disjointed, we see from a carrier perspective, so you're going to need to give them a place to start, and then they can build off of that. But it's going to be a work in progress, and I would anticipate you're going to need to allow some time to generate that and be successful.
Great. Okay. Well, we have another one posted here. So this one says, AT&T is our primary carrier. We have a hard time having them work with us on resolving disputes, even though we do have a dedicated person to handle this. So do you have any suggestions?
Sure. So if they're your primary carrier, hopefully you have enough spend with them to have a dedicated account team. That would obviously be the goal. That's where we see clients have the most success in working with carriers. So I would engage them to determine if you can obtain an escalation list and who to contact if you're reaching an impasse or not getting more information as far as a timely turnaround there. I'd also request at least quarterly business reviews or quarterly calls with them to hold them accountable and outline expectations on when should you expect to hear with respect to disputes, what is an accurate time frame, and how will they be communicating that to you. So I would start by trying to set some expectations with them and also leveraging an escalation list if possible.
Okay, great. Okay, looks like that's about as much questions that we have. Now you have a few more minutes if you'd like to post a question before we close out this webinar. So if you have anything on your mind that was brought up during the webinar, if you have any questions, this would be a great time to go ahead and submit that through the Q&A portion of your screen. Looks like we're not getting any response from the audience, so we're going to go ahead and end this webinar. Thank you, Jennifer, for taking time today with us, and that's the end of today's presentation. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask Jennifer, I will make sure to send out her contact information to you along with a copy of this presentation. As an added bonus, you have an opportunity to take a self-survey of your telecommunications after we end this presentation. Just follow the link to the corresponding survey page and answer the multiple choice questions. We'll provide you with an evaluation for your review within the next 72 hours. Thank you for taking time with us today.